Hello everyone and welcome to Matchbook Flashback. I'm your host Alec Ogg, and I've got this big collection of matchbooks that I bought at an estate sale. They're in this big glass jar and they're all different colors and designs from all different times and places. But the strangest thing happens when I light each match. If you look into the flame, it starts to swirl hypnotically, and inside the flame you can see a story unfolding, held like a memory in the matchbook. We've been snowed in down here in Tennessee, so I'm excited to light one of these with you and see if there's a story. Let me grab one here. This one's cool. It's a little, it has some scenery on it. It's like a photo print of this beautiful lake surrounded by mountains with, what are these called? Rocky Mountain Douglas fir trees covering the mountains. It's beautiful. It's like bluish green clear water in this lake. Oh, and big letters on the back it says Sullivan Lake. Copyright down here says 2009. Sullivan Lake is up in the eastern corner of Washington State. It's near the border of Idaho and just 18 miles south of Canada. It's like almost on the Canadian border. Looks beautiful from this design on the matchbook. Well, what do you say we light it up and see what happens? Now when I strike it, I need you to look deeply into the flame. Look deeply into the flame.
Yeah, so it was in Ponderay County in Washington State. There's a called Sullivan Lake. There's a lot of stuff that kind of led up to my later conclusion also, what kind of brought me to the conclusion that it's Bigfoot from things that I experienced as a younger kid too. I mean, I guess I'll start with the actual encounter first, and then kind of, because the question everybody asked me is like, well, what made you think Bigfoot? And so that's kind of what brings me back to the encounters when I was younger. But yeah, so it was kind of just a normal winter day. We decided we were going to go camping, and we loaded up the truck. Well, I call it a truck. It was actually a 92 4Runner.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, Randy, who all's with you?
At the time, it was a girlfriend that I had years ago and my dog. So, we loaded up the rig and headed off to go camping. And I usually there's a place, the town is Usk, or Cusick is like the side-by-side towns. And we usually go there to a place called Skookum Creek, but I wanted to go somewhere different this time. And so I just kept driving down Leclerc Road and, turned off on a random road and went up and found a place to camp. And it turns out we were at Sullivan Lake. And it was the first time I had ever been there. And so we just kind of picked a random spot, and driving in, you didn't see a single person anywhere. And an odd thing was that on the way in, there was a white car kind of pulled off on the side of the road, doors open, and there was nobody around. There wasn't a single person anywhere. And this was like maybe noon, give or take. So we finally go in, set up camp, and I tied up a tarp on the side of the 4Runner and started setting up tables and chairs and got a fire going. And so it was just the two of us and our dog, we were setting up camp, and I heard way off in the distance what kind of sounded like an elk bugle. And, I was 19 and figured I'm going to just let nature know that I'm here, And so we had this big rock in our campsite, and off the edge was another rock, so I grabbed a big rock and I cracked it a couple times to kind of emulate a gunshot, the best I could. Just a big noise, basically, to let things know that I was there, because, there's not usually people frequenting any kind of public, campsites that time of year. And over the course of a few hours, that elk bugle sound just kind of got closer and closer, and you start to realize it's not an elk bugle. I don't know what it is, but it's not an elk bugle. And it got to a point where it sounded relatively close, and I start to realize that this is kind of an odd sound. It sounded, the best I can describe, like one of them little wooden kids' train whistles. It was just kind of a multi-pitch whistle, and it would just cut off abruptly. And this went on about every 45 minutes for a couple hours. And, just ignored it, didn't think much of it. My dog was running around carefree. And about, I don't know, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you'd hear it call, and then about 15 or 20 minutes would go by, and then a similar sound would call from the other side of the campsite. And this went on for a while like that too. And I mean, total encounter went on till about 1 o'clock at night. But, so I started hearing 2 sounds, and then I would hear 3, then I would hear 4. And after a while, we started to record the audio, and, the best we could. And so my dog started kind of getting closer and closer. He went from running free around anywhere he wanted to kind of staying within the perimeter of the campsite. And kind of just got closer and closer, and got to the point where he wouldn't go like past the campfire right in front of our truck. And just tail between his legs, kind of finicky. And I started getting a little unsettled at that point. And so about 11:30, 12 o'clock, kind of got this real deep, unsettling feeling in my stomach. I just didn't feel right.
How was your girlfriend at the time reacting?
She was pretty freaked out. She wasn't much of a camper in the first place, and so you start adding weird stuff like that, and she was kind of spooked already and kind of just wanted to go to bed, really. And I was kind of, the brawny 19-year-old. I'm like, oh yeah, we're fine. We're in the woods. I got an axe and a machete. We'll be just fine. And then as time went on, I kind of started getting that like internal dread, and I just wasn't willing to admit it at first. I just told her, I was like, hey, you need to go ahead and get in the truck, get the dog in the truck. I'm going to start loading stuff up because I feel like something's not right. And yeah, it's trying to really think exactly what was going through my head. But I mean, I really felt like I was starting to be surrounded, like I was being stalked. That's kind of the feeling I got because I literally would hear him call from almost every direction around me. And at the end, I heard at least 5, possibly more different sounds from all different directions. Like I was circled. There was something around almost every point of our campsite. So I had the girlfriend at the time get in the car. I got the dog in the car, and I started kind of loading stuff in. And I started my 4Runner at that point too, because it's super cold outside and they don't like to run cold. So, I got most stuff loaded in the car, and I went to go walk around up to the front of the 4Runner, and out of nowhere, this huge log just crashed into the side of my rig. It shattered the window. It bent the B pillars in the back. Like I had to have a body shop help me pull it out so I could get the new window put back into it.
Where were you in relation to your truck when this log hit it?
So I was loading stuff in the back door on the passenger side, and the back passenger window on the 4Runner is what got hit. So I was originally loading stuff into the back door, like a couple feet from that window. Like I'm basically right side by side with the window to the back door. And so I had just walked around from that door to the front of the 4Runner when it actually hit my rig.
And what do you, your girlfriend, and the dog do at that moment when it crashes in?
Well, the dog pretty much sunk down, tail between his legs in the front seat. She squealed a little bit and I froze, like initially. And then I went into panic mode and I climbed into the truck as fast as I could and got out of there.
And were there any trees nearby that a skeptic person would just be like, oh, well, a branch fell off a tree?
I highly doubt that where we were at, the trees could have fallen like that. I mean, a skeptic can say whatever they want, but the angle that came, I mean, it was like, I feel like it was thrown almost like a boomerang at the side of my rig. You know, it didn't come from high. It came from the side and the brush line.
And about how big was it? Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say the force that it hit my truck with, I mean, there's no way that was a falling log, you know, at the angle and everything it came off. And to answer your next question you're going to ask, I mean, it was probably 8 or 10 inches around and, you know, 5-6 feet long.
Oh, wow.
It was a big log. You know, it's not something, I don't see Andre the Giant throwing it with the force that it hit my truck with. It exploded that back window on the 4Runner and it bent that pillar on the backside where it hit, because it hit like the back corner of the rig. And, you know, at that point, I just kind of froze for a second and I scrambled to get in the car and I left. I didn't even take the tarp down that I had tied to the side of it. And I drove all the way back to Spokane. I didn't even stop and look back, and I've never been back there since.
Did you and your girlfriend speak at all on the drive back to Spokane?
Not really, no. It was pretty much silence the whole drive back.
Did you ever speak to her about what her impressions of that might have been?
Not really. She was real quick to shut it off, but she didn't want to go camping after that.
Okay. So nothing was really floated as to an explanation between the two of you?
I mean, with a couple days later, I kind of came to the conclusion of the whole Bigfoot thing, and I kind of, you know, I had mentioned that, but, you know, she definitely wasn't a believer of anything like that. And it was just kind of gave me the whole skeptic side of things. You know, she's cynical of the whole situation. She was scared and couldn't explain what it was, but wasn't willing to entertain the idea that a Sasquatch is what was out there. So,
and that fear that you felt, did it feel, or the dread, did that feel unnatural to you, or like more intense than your usual emotions?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was the most primitive fear I've ever felt. And, you know, I've gone camping a lot in my life, and, you know, I was out camping with my dad as a kid, and we had a bear walk right by us, and we weren't tent camping. And I mean, it was sniffing our face while we were sleeping, and I was more scared than that experience. You know, it's like when it comes to like fight, flight, or freeze, I found out I freeze 100%. And then it took me a second to kind of regroup and scramble into my car.
Well, yeah, you hear about this freeze response to this phenomenon you're describing a lot. So I don't know if it's you or if it's just whatever this phenomenon can do to you. But yeah, it seems consistent with a lot of the people I talk to about their Bigfoot encounters.
Yeah, it's hard to really explain it until you're really faced with that kind of a fear. I mean, I always thought that I'd be the guy who would fight, you know, in a situation like that for my life. And I, you know, in that situation, I realized that I probably am going to respond a little bit different.
And it was this weird whistle noise?
Yeah, it was a weird multi-pitched, almost like a kid's train whistle. You know, I don't know if you ever used one of those, but that's the closest thing I could describe to what I heard, except just more organic. You know, it sounded like more of an organic whistle.
So when the noises, when these whistling noises are happening, how kind of long does this bugle whistle sound last? And like, is it repeating?
I'd say In the beginning, when it was just like one or two of them, the call would initially last probably like 4 or 5 seconds, and then it would just kind of abruptly cut off. And it was the same back and forth when there was two of them. And then when it got to the point where there was more of them and they were calling more frequently, they probably only lasted like 2 or 3 seconds. They were a little bit shorter and they would respond a little bit quicker.
Would you feel comfortable imitating it as close as you can, even though knowing it won't do any justice to it, or would you prefer not to?
Yeah, I can't do the multi-pitch thing, but I mean, it just like, imagine if you had three people side by side whistling at the exact same time and stopping at the exact same time.
Okay, because yeah, I can try to kind of recreate it in post-production, and so I'll do my best. So 3 people whistling all at once.
That's kind of what it sounded like. Yeah, it was like you could tell it was one thing whistling, but it wasn't just like one solid tune like you and I would whistle. It was like layered, like there was like 2 or 3 different pitches in that one whistle.
And it sounded organic, like a voice still?
Yeah, like it sounded like a, I don't know, a being, I guess. It definitely sounded like a human whistle, just very layered.
And it was loud enough to project out like a elk bugle?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. Here are some elk bugles, if the listener wants to hear them.
Because when I first heard it, it was definitely quite a ways out. And from a distance, it had that kind of elk bugle sound, like kind of like a plastic straw. When you take one of them crinkle straws and you blow through it, and it has that like bugly kind of whistle.
Yeah.
That's what it sounded like when I very first heard it, way off in the distance. But then when it actually got close, I mean, it was definitely not the same sound that I was hearing from a distance. And it still had quite a bit of like, I don't know how to say it. Like it was very a powerful whistle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Did you
like it was
feel it at
whistle.
all?
I can't say that I really felt it. No, maybe towards the end of the night when I started kind of getting that deep sinking feeling, I started just kind of feeling that primal feel like something just wasn't right, but it's kind of hard to say at this point because it's been a lot of years and I don't remember exactly if like I felt it or not, but I know that I had just a deep sinking feeling that I needed to get out there.
You were mentioning that you kind of came to this conclusion or this possibility that it could be a Bigfoot creature and how it might have been tied to stuff you experienced as a kid. Can you go into that?
Yeah, so about 40 miles east of Sullivan Lake, where I was originally gonna camp before we decided to go somewhere new, there's a little place over there called Skookum Creek. And I used to camp there a lot with my dad. And many times as a kid, I would experience weird things. And kind of my dad, of course, would always brush it off because he's kind of a cynic too. Even to this day, he won't admit some of the stuff that we experienced together. But like we were camping once as a kid, and my dad's like, "Hey, look, Mama Bear's sending her cubs up a tree." And I started looking, and I grabbed our binoculars, and I'm looking, and I'm like, "Dad, that's a real funny looking bear." It's like, okay, I didn't think it looked like a bear. I thought it looked more monkeyish, but my dad wouldn't have it. It was a baby bear as far as he was concerned. And then, yeah, and that same Skookum Creek campground. So when you turn off the main road, there's a real long, like maybe a 1/4 mile driveway in till you get to the first set of cattle gate. And, the whole campsite is surrounded by barbed wire fence. And on the side of the entrance going in, on the side of the road, there's a small wooded area, probably 30 feet wide. And then you get into clearings for some power lines. And in that clearing right there, we were going into camp, and I got all the way in, realized the gate was locked, and so on the way out, my truck sunk in the snow, and I, was pretty buried. So we were looking for wood or something to wedge under the tires and help get us unstuck. And I noticed these two large sticks, and they were set kind of in an A. It was just odd. It was off, out of place. It wasn't something that would have fallen like that. And so I was going to grab them to put underneath my truck, and I realized when I pulled them down that when a stick breaks, you kind of get those natural frays from the structure of the wood.
Yeah.
They were bent and broken, and the other one was set where those had been bent and broken out of the way, and they were set super deep into the ground, and everything. There was snow, probably a foot and a half of snow, and they were hard in the ground, and it was fresh. You could tell they weren't snowed on. And so I kind of thought that was odd. And so I started looking around, and I saw these huge footprints. And so I went and got my brother and my friend that were with me at the time and showed them, because at first they're like, "Oh, you're full of crap. You didn't see anything like that." I'm like, "Dude, you got to come see this for yourself." And so, I'm 6'1" and wear a size 13 boot, and I couldn't jump from one footprint to the next. I would stand at one footprint and try to jump to the next one, and I still came up probably like a foot short of the next footprint in the stride. And these things, when I stuck my foot in that footprint, they were, I don't know, I had maybe an inch and a half off to the side of my boot and about 3 inches to the front of my boot. I mean, they were good sized footprints, and they were fresh in the snow. You could tell, they weren't snowed in or anything. They were fresh, and you could see like the kick out from where the front ball of your foot would kind of push back as you took a step.
Yeah.
And I started looking at them, and I realized that it was a walking stride, because you could tell the heels sunk deeper than the toes did on all the footprints that we looked at. And so we followed it back for 15, 20 minutes. And then my dog's hackles went up, and she started acting kind of funny. And so at that point, we went back to the truck, because I didn't have a gun at that time. I was like, I don't know, maybe 17. I just barely got a license. So, and then another time we were out at the same campsite, and there was a lot that went on that weekend, and my dad had discovered some crazy stuff in a burn pile out there. So we had to go and get a hold of the police and everything. And so me and my brother and my dad's girlfriend's kids were alone in the campsite. And, it was just a normal day. We were all playing, having a good old time, and our parents were gone for a while. And it turns out it was at the same time they were coming back to camp. I guess my dad said he stopped to let his girlfriend at the time use the bathroom, and she had shined and flashed something that was in the woods by the outhouses, and it screamed, and it was a big, big scream. She was terrified, ran to the car, and we were in the campsite, and we heard it, and I mean, it rattled everybody in the campsite. The glass on the cars was shaking. I mean, it was huge, huge sound. And so we all locked up in the car and hid. But that sounded like, I don't know, kind of like a cougar, but big, big. Like if an elephant let out a cougar cry. I mean, it's just felt massive. And so we hid in the car, and my dad comes back just a couple minutes after that, because they were the ones that flashed whatever it was in the woods. And he's like, "Yeah, let's go find it." And I'm like, I don't really think this is a good idea, Dad. And my little brother's like, "Yeah, let's go, let's do it." So of course, being the big brother, I didn't want to be scared. I didn't want to be a chicken. So I was like, "All right, let's go." My dad grabbed his gun, and I grabbed my hatchet, and we went off in the woods looking for this thing. And we got about where they had experienced it by the outhouses. And as we were walking in, it sounded like a freight train running through the woods. I mean, breaking branches, trees. It was big, whatever it was. And the only thing we got to hear was the barbed wire, as whatever it was cleared the barbed wire fence around the campsite. And when we got to the line of that barbed wire fencing, just saw this huge upright figure, at a full sprint. And I talked to my dad about it not that long ago, and he's like, "Oh, that's not what that was. That's not what we saw." And I'm like, "Dad, I know I saw an upright thing running. That was not a bear. It wasn't a deer. It was huge and fast. But my dad, even he 20 years later, still won't admit what we saw.
What did he find in the burn pit that warranted going to the police?
He said that he had found what he thought was a child that was hidden in a burn pit. And when the police went out there, they told him allegedly it was a dog. So we weren't at the site. My dad is the one who experienced it. And so, and he had told me about some weird stuff the weekend before he was out there without us. And I mean, my dad was on and off drugs at that time, so I didn't really take what he said very seriously. But, he said the weekend before he was out there and they were getting wood out of the burn pit for camp pot, for the fire. And he said this dog was at the camps, like at that burn pit. And he said it would basically copy his paces. He'd grab wood from the wood pit and take 4 paces to the car. The dog would take 4 paces and turn around and sit down and look at the wood pile. And, this went on. And he said as they were driving back to the campsite, this dog followed the car, took a left into the wood line, and came out back in front of him, pointed back towards the wood pile on a straight road. And then the next weekend we were out there all together as a family. And that's when he said he had kind of like a weird out of body experience where he saw himself walk around the wood pile and seen what he saw. And then he's like, hey, I need you to come with me, and talking to his girlfriend, I need you to make sure that what I'm seeing is actually here. And, he said that he opened it up, he lifted some of the wood out of the way and he found a pink blanket with what looked like a little kid wrapped up in it. And so they had got a hold of the police out there, and it would have been the police from Newport, Ponderay County Police. So from what he told me, they told him it was just a dog. And my dad's like, yeah, except dogs have dew claw and fur. What he said he saw was a little kid's hand. So.
Jeez.
But, we were back in campsite for all of that. So that's all just something that was passed to me from him. I don't actually know if that's what they found or not.
That's bizarre, though, with the dog and everything.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's something that's always kind of been odd to me, too. And I never really made sense of it. But, you read stuff and everything says that dogs are messengers of the dead. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense if that's the case.
Yeah, did his girlfriend ever talk about what she saw when she flashed a light at it?
Not really. She just said she saw eye shine, something big. And then when it freaked out, she turned around and cleared the car, and got in the car as fast as she could. So she didn't really go into a whole lot of depth on what she saw, but she was pretty shook up. I mean, she definitely didn't want to stay there and keep camping. So what we heard at the other end of the campsite was massive. It's kind of like a little loop. I don't know, if you're walking from the bathrooms, it'd probably take you like 10 minutes to walk from there to the campsite we were in. And I mean, when it screamed, it was so loud, the reverb, you could feel it in your chest and in the car. So, I mean, I know whatever we experienced that night was big also.
And that scream was different from the whistling sound you heard in the other encounter?
Yeah, no, the scream sounded a lot more like what you hear on some of the Bigfoot audio that it's all over, where they're actually like screaming in the woods. And it was just big guttural cry. I don't know how else to describe it, except it sounded like almost like a cougar scream, but much larger.
And rewinding to when you saw something through the binoculars that your dad said was a bear, what exactly did you see?
It was just kind of a small furry creature. It didn't have the muzzle of a bear. It had more of like a flat face. I can't really say it looked like a monkey because it didn't look like a monkey, but it definitely didn't look like a bear. It had more monkey characteristics. It was, I don't know, because wrapped around a tree, so it's hard to say. But I'd say it was the size of like a 6-year-old kid. And, kind of dark brown, mangy looking hair. It almost looked like a brown bear cub. but the face on it wasn't right, and there was no ears. It didn't have your typical bear ears, and bear cubs generally have a pretty distinct little ears.
Yeah. Have you had any other experiences since then?
No, I haven't had any experiences since then, and I mean, admittedly, since that Sullivan Lake incident, I have not been in the woods in Washington. So, I mean, since then, I kind of go camping, but I have a wife and kids of my own now, so we have a camper, and when we go camping, we are armed and in a more secured situation. So, and we go to a completely different region over here in Idaho. I mean, technically, it's probably like the same mountain range, but I feel more secure over here.
So this experience affected you long term?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm going on 35 this year, and I have not been back to Sullivan Lake since I was 19. And I lived in Ione from 2013 to 2015, 16. And even when I lived there, within like a 15-mile shot of it, I never went back.
Why do you think it had such a deep impression on you?
Honestly, I think it's just that primal fear, the way I felt. I've never felt so terrified in my entire life. I feel like if I would have stayed, I probably wouldn't have made it out of there alive.
Can I ask you a one more question, Randy? Because I know the listeners will be mad if I don't have this somewhere in there. But you mentioned recording the audio. Can you let me know what happened to the recording of the whistling?
Well, the recording was on my girlfriend at the time's phone, and I mean, since then, I had transferred it to my own devices as well, but through the years, life has not been so kind, and I was homeless for a while, and I had lost literally everything that I owned. And of course, I lost contact with her quite a few years ago too. And so, I mean, any trace of pictures and audio has been long gone. So,
Oh, that's totally understandable. I just didn't want to leave listeners hanging where you mentioned a recording and I didn't somehow follow up on it.
yeah. And speaking of the recordings, I used to work at a Subway in Spokane, and it was right up the road from the police academy. And so a lot of, like the public forest rangers and stuff have to go and train there because they're deputized as well. And so they go through a lot of the same police training, and they would eat lunch at my facility pretty regularly. And so on many occasions, I had tried to talk to them about different things, Bigfoot or different cryptids, and you pretty much always get shut down. They are real quick to shut the conversation down. And when I did have that audio recording, I had showed a group of them that were eating lunch there what I had recorded. And, most of them were quick to dismiss. Oh, it was a screech owl. Oh, it was this. Oh, it was that, and the one guy stayed real quiet. He kind of went a little white, you could tell he was real off put by what he had heard. And, the other guys got out and went and got in their car, and he kind of stayed behind for a minute. And he's like, I'm not going to tell you what I think that was, but what I will tell you is that you were lucky you got out of there. And I tried to ask, I was like, why do you say that? What do you mean? And he's like, I'm not going to say anything else, but I'm just going to tell you, you're lucky you got out of there. And, that really kind of sat with me too. I was like, man, what do these people know that they're not telling us? Why would he say that to me?
Well, as you can see, the match has gone out, and as the smoke clears, I couldn't help but pull up the BFRO.net, the Bigfoot Field Research Organization. It's like the biggest database of Bigfoot reports, and I searched Washington State and then Pend Oreille County, and there are actually 2 other sightings listed at Sullivan Lake. Both of them happened in 2002. One lady got a real good look at a gray one, and 2 other campers had an experience similar to Randy's that we just saw. Could it be the same creature? I don't know, but I'll link those 2 reports in the show notes for you to check out. And since I'm nice enough to link those reports in the show notes, perhaps you could be nice enough to text a link of this episode to someone who you think might enjoy it. And you could give us a 5-star rating. It only takes one click, and it really helps this little show grow. By the way, if you or someone you know has an unusual story, have them send it my way. My email is alec@parasaur.co. It is spelled out in the show notes if you need to reference that. Thanks again for stopping by, and I hope you come back next week because I have another match to light.